All right, regional monitoring and enforcement. So prepare to constantly evolve your enforcement strategy. And this is very important because we talk about changing selling behavior a lot. And as you are finding ways to go after the counterfeit merchandise, the counterfeiters are constantly evolving their strategy as well. So something that worked today might not work tomorrow. You might have to come up with a completely different approach. And you're also being responsive and aware to overall changes in the landscape. So is there a trend of the way that these counterfeit sellers are changing their listings, or they're making it harder for you to take them down? And being, diligent about keeping up to date and being thoughtful of the clues that you kind of see in the changes of seller behavior will help you have a more effective strategy and a more consistent strategy. And then be able to adapt internal processes to specific marketplace requirements and enforcement guidelines. So this is extremely important, because, again, what might work on one marketplace might not work on the other. And if you keep doing something that's not working, you're never going to have an impact. You're never going to be able to clean up the marketplace. So by understanding kind of the individual nuances of each of the marketplaces, how they operate, how responsive they are, that's very important. And then understanding your distribution partners and affiliates in each marketplace. Another really common thing we see is that people will originally have a distribution agreement, but it quickly kind of snowballs out of hand. So a handful of authorized distributors can quickly turn into a nightmare when they begin to authorize their own partners. So this is often due to weak affiliate agreements and guidelines. The distribution channel can quickly grow out of control. And the result is that while your original distributors might only sell authentic product, the bottom of the barrel, the bottom of this chain, we start to actually see authentic product mixed with counterfeit goods. And this can be avoided by strengthening agreements and being tough on those distributors who break them. And this goes for a distributor or any business that has maybe 5 authorized dealers or even 500. And, it's being diligent about tracking how these agreements are being made. I've seen organizations where they think they have maybe 15 authorized distributors in China, and through the process of, being proactive and enforcing and taking down the unauthorized content, the unauthorized listings from non-distributors, they're discovering they had many more distributors than they actually thought. So what started out as 15, a year into an enforcement process has now snowballed to, there's actually 130 authorized distributors. And then maintain separate goals and strategies for addressing gray market versus counterfeit. Now, there is a lot of overlap when it comes to enforcement as far as the ways that you try to get infringing listings down. But know that your gray market problem isn't going to be solved in the same way that your counterfeit problem might be, and they're going to require different approaches. Many times they require more of a soft approach, so despite it being authentic product, probably, they might be using your, copyrighted images without your consent, and that could be used as leverage to get listings down off these marketplaces. And then set realistic goals that prioritize making a counterfeit version of your product hard to find by consumers. And this again goes back to striking that balance between diligent daily enforcement, or at least a regular pattern of enforcement, and then going after those high-value targets. They have to be done in tandem. But know that you're not going to get everything down overnight, no matter how, aggressively you start enforcing. It's going to take time. And you're going to notice that the more you enforce, again, as you're changing seller behavior, you're going to have to be adapting your strategy to make sure that your brand continues to be a hard target for counterfeiters. Great. Utilize local, professional, and native speakers for review. This is an extremely important point. Having boots on the ground and having local partners and native speakers engaging with regional resources, so like legal counsel, for example, who we said you should be engaging with locally to make sure your IP portfolio is as strong as it can possibly be. And you're taking advantage of all this expertise that's really already out there in order to develop your own brand protection strategy that is going to be high impact when implemented. Establishing relationships is one of the most important things in Asia, and you have to be able to maintain those relationships. So having local expertise can really be a differentiator between a successful and an ineffective program. So you have that Chinese expertise. You also have that same time zone, which is very important, and just being close to these different locations, these marketplace headquarters, that's another important part about the relationship building, because it's about establishing trust with the marketplace at the end of the day. And that way you're able to actually sit and work through problems as they come up. So that's some of the investment that organizations are making, is having boots on the ground. And those are the things that are really accelerating in that area right now. And you also have to know how to leverage those relationships. In order to be able to do that, you have to support and focus on building them. So escalate unresolved issues outside of the standard IPR process. We have to be careful with the way that we engage with marketplaces. So as we're building trust and we're solidifying those relationships that are going to help you have a successful enforcement program, be wary of being too aggressive, because the more aggressive you are, if you're not being responsive to what the marketplaces are telling you, you say, oh, well, these are all counterfeit by virtue of being on this website, or, the price point is too low, take them down, they have to be counterfeit. Well, if it's a marketplace that won't let you use price point as, a single, you can't use price point alone as an indicator, but that's the only thing you're able to provide to them, and you're not being responsive to them saying, hey, you also need to provide, this information, or you need to approach it in a different way. They might down the road, you might have additional scrutiny on the things that you submit to them, and it could slow everything down, anything from the time it takes them to process your enforcements, and the longer it takes for them to do that, of course, the more opportunities there are for people to be purchasing these counterfeit goods. And then if you're entirely unresponsive to what they're trying to tell you, hopefully this doesn't happen, but you don't want to end up on some banned list where, they've decided internally based on, the way that you are enforcing that, you're not being responsive and you're not operating within their, kind of guidelines, so they're just not going to deal with you. So leverage intelligence gained from monitoring and enforcement for valuable insights into developing marketplaces. This is a huge one. So when we think about enforcement and what a successful enforcement strategy is and what a successful enforcement program looks like, it's really easy to only see it in terms of volume. So the number of listings we got down, the number of items that they were advertising that were shut down, and the price. Those are all important things, and that's key that you do want to enforce in volume. when you get to that point, and you do want to be taking a lot of things down to keep those, front pages clean and keep consumers from stumbling across those counterfeit items. But also, there's a tremendous amount of data that you're gaining from these listings, and that can be lost, I think, a little too easily, because that could be usable to developing your strategy. So, imagine all the data points, all the pieces of information that a single marketplace listing has, tracking that and then using that, to identify, okay, it looks based off of all this information we've collected from these listings that these counterfeiters are moving towards lower volume to avoid suspicion, but maybe they're posting more listings. So definitely make sure that you're taking advantage of everything that you get when you're engaging with marketplaces and you're reviewing these listings and enforcing. And then you have to be flexible and vigilant. So, when we say being flexible with your strategy, again, that is knowing that as marketplaces are constantly evolving, their policies are changing, your brand is evolving, and so are the counterfeiters. We always have to be one step ahead, and in order to do that, we have to be leveraging that intelligence we're getting from them and changing to be able to address the way that they're now operating. And then being vigilant, like I said, that's consistently enforcing, and that's going to go a long ways as you're establishing those, relationships of trust with the marketplace. If they see that you're being consistent with taking stuff down, that this is, a program that isn't going away, it's going to help you a lot down the road. And you have to be creative, just as creative as the counterfeiters are and other infringers are. Maybe if you're having trouble getting something down or, getting any momentum using one strategy, there's definitely a lot to be said for trying something new. Thinking of ways to, for example, take down a counterfeit item where they're not using your image, they're not using your trademark, it is counterfeit. You then have to come up with a way to make that case without, those really obvious indicators. And as your program, evolves, and once you're, pretty far down the road into it, you're going to see so many changes that being creative becomes necessary. And then also being calculated. And that is all that pre-work where you're understanding the scope of the problem. You have clear goals for each of the problems. You understand, just how much is out there and where you want to be a year, 2 years down the road. And then that you're also doing those things such as if a marketplace has a demerit policy where you have to enforce every 3 days for, the most impact, then that's, being strategic and calculated by timing your enforcements in that way.